Everyone laughed when a black waitress claimed to heal the eyes of the blind Korean Mafia boss, until the impossible started happening. The silk tie felt wrong in Cho Dong-jin's hands. Too smooth, too slippery. He'd been tying ties since he was 12 years old, 15 years of muscle memory. But 6 months of darkness had stolen even that simple certainty. His fingers fumbled with the fabric, and frustration burned hot in his chest. "Boss, let me—" Lee Jae-sung's voice came from somewhere to his left. "Don't!" Dongjin's voice was ice. 28 years old, head of the Cho family organization, controller of half of New York's Koreatown, and he couldn't tie his own goddamn tie. "I'll do it myself." He felt rather than saw Jae-sung step back, felt the weight of pity in the room, and it made him want to break something. 6 months ago, he'd survived an assassination attempt by the Russian Bratva. 3 bullets, one catching the edge of his skull. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive. The traumatic brain injury had damaged his optic nerves. They called it cortical blindness, told him it might be permanent. Dongjin didn't feel lucky. He finally managed the tie, though he had no idea if it was straight. "Let's go. We're late for the meeting with the suppliers." "Boss, perhaps we should postpone." This was Park Min-ho, his longtime bodyguard and closest friend. "Why? Because I'm blind?" Dongjin's laugh was bitter. "The organization doesn't stop because I can't see. Business doesn't pause. Our enemies certainly aren't waiting for me to recover." He grabbed his cane, hated the thing, hated what it represented, and moved toward where he knew the door was. "Besides, we're meeting at the usual place, Sunrise Cafe. I've memorized every step." He had. 3 blocks from his building, turn left, 42 steps to the crosswalk, wait for the audio signal, cross, 28 steps to the cafe door. He'd walked it 50 times in the past month, with Minho describing every obstacle until Dongjin had built a map in his mind. But memory wasn't the same as sight. Every journey was an exercise in controlled terror, in refusing to show weakness, in pretending that not seeing the world didn't make him want to scream. Ruth Bennett had been working at Sunrise Cafe for 4 months, and she'd developed a 6th sense for trouble. The kind of trouble that walked in wearing expensive suits and speaking in low Korean tones that stopped when she approached their table. The kind that left generous tips and made the owner, Mr. Park, nervous in a way that suggested obligation rather than gratitude. She'd noticed the group the first time they came in 3 weeks ago. 5 men, always the same table in the back corner, always ordering the same things. But it was the 6th man who'd caught her attention, the one who arrived last, guided by one of the others, moving with careful deliberation. Blind. Young, handsome in a sharp-featured way, impeccably dressed, but blind, and angry about it if the set of his jaw was any indication. Ruth understood anger, understood the frustration of a body that didn't work the way it should, of being dependent on others when all you wanted was independence. She'd watched her mother go through it for 3 years before the miracle that had saved her life. "Ruth, table 7 needs refills," called out Stephanie, the other waitress, pulling Ruth from her thoughts. Table 7 was the Korean group. Ruth grabbed the coffee pot and headed over, professional smile in place. They always went quiet when she approached, switching from Korean to English or just stopping mid-conversation. Today was no different. "Coffee?" she asked brightly, already pouring for the man on the end, the one she'd mentally tagged as bodyguard based on the way he constantly scanned the room. "Yes, thank you," he said, accent thick but understandable. Ruth moved around the table, refilling cups, hyper-aware of the blind man at the head of the table. He sat perfectly straight, hands folded on the table, dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. Today he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A thin scar traced along his right temple, disappearing into his hairline. "Sir," she said softly, pot poised over his cup. "Coffee?" "Yes." His voice was different from the others. Smoother, more controlled, educated. American-born, maybe, or raised here young. "Black, no sugar." "You got it." She poured carefully, and as she did, she noticed his hands. They were clenched tight despite their casual position, knuckles white with tension. The hands of someone in constant pain, or constant fear, or both. Ruth had seen those hands before. On her mother in those dark years when blindness had stolen not just her sight, but her will to live. She finished pouring and moved away. but something made her glance back. The blind man had brought the coffee to his lips with measured precision, but his hand shook slightly. Just a tremor, quickly controlled. But there, a crack in the perfect facade. "Ruth, order up!" Mr. Park's voice snapped her back to work. But she kept watching the table throughout her shift, kept noticing small things. The way the blind man's companions treated him with careful deference, like he was made of glass. The way he never asked for help but accepted it when offered with gritted teeth. The way he sat isolated even in a group, trapped in darkness. And Ruth thought about Dr. Elena Volkov, about the miracle she'd performed on Ruth's mother, about the research Ruth had abandoned when money ran out, about the knowledge that still lived in her head, even though she served coffee instead of pursuing her medical degree. She thought about it all through her shift, through the lunch rush, through the afternoon lull. And when the Korean group stood to leave, when the bodyguard took the blind man's arm to guide him out, Ruth made a decision that would change everything. "Same time Thursday, boss?" Minho asked as they settled into the car, a black Mercedes with bulletproof windows and enough hidden weapons to start a small war. "Yes, we need to maintain routine. Predictability keeps the peace." Dongjin leaned back against the leather seat, exhaustion hitting him now that he was away from watching eyes. These outings to the cafe took everything he had, the concentration required to appear normal, to not betray his fear, to project strength when he felt like he was drowning. "Boss, I have to ask, why that cafe? We could meet at the office, or at secure locations." Jae Sung's voice came from the front passenger seat. "Because I refuse to hide. Because if I retreat to offices and safe houses, if I stop being seen, the vultures will smell weakness." Dongjin's jaw tightened. "The Bratva already tried to kill me once. The Chinese triads are watching for any sign that the Cho family is vulnerable. If I disappear, if I show fear, we're finished. But no buts, we continue as planned." Dongjin rubbed his temples where the ever-present headache throbbed. "Did the doctors call with the test results?" Silence, the kind that screamed bad news. "Minho, the results. They said the damage is extensive, that the optic nerve trauma combined with the cortical injury makes recovery unlikely." Minho's voice was heavy with sympathy Dongjin didn't want. "Boss, they're recommending you start adjusting to permanent blindness, learning adaptive techniques, considering a service dog." "No." The word came out harder than intended. "I'm not giving up. There has to be something. Experimental treatments, specialists overseas, something." "We've consulted with 17 specialists across 4 countries, Jae Sung said quietly. "They all say the same thing. The injury is too severe. The chances of recovery are less than 1%. Less than 1%? Might as well be 0. Might as well be never." Dongjin turned his face toward the window, toward light he couldn't see, toward a world that had become nothing but sound and smell and touch. 6 months, half a year of darkness with no end in sight, and his men expected him to just accept it. "Take me home," he said flatly. "I need to prepare for tonight's meeting with the Russians." The car ride was silent, and Dongjin retreated into his thoughts, into plans and strategies and the constant mental chess game of running a criminal organization while blind, into the exhausting work of appearing strong when all he wanted was to rage at the unfairness of it all. He was 28 years old. He'd survived his father's brutal training, taken over the organization at 24 when the old man died, expanded operations, made the Cho family name feared and respected. He'd survived assassination attempts, gang wars, federal investigations, but he couldn't survive this darkness. It was eating him alive from the inside out. Ruth's shift ended at 6, but she stayed late, wiping down tables and organizing sugar packets, waiting until Mr. Park was in the back office before she approached Stephanie. "Hey, those Korean guys who come in every week, what do you know about them?" Stephanie looked up from counting her tips, eyes widening. "Girl, you do not want to know about them. Trust me." "Why?" "Because they're dangerous. Like seriously dangerous." Stephanie glanced around, lowered her voice. "My boyfriend's cousin works security at one of their clubs in Koreatown. He says the blind guy? That's Cho Dong-jin, head of the Korean Mafia." Ruth's stomach dropped. "Mafia? Korean organized crime? Yeah. The Cho family runs everything. Gambling, protection, smuggling, you name it. They're powerful, they're connected, and they're not people you mess with. Stephanie grabbed Ruth's arm. Why are you asking? Ruth, please tell me you're not thinking of doing something stupid. I'm not, I'm just curious. But Ruth's mind was racing. Mafia boss, criminal, dangerous. Everything logical in her head said to stay far away, to forget what she'd noticed, to focus on her own life. But she kept seeing his hands, the tremor he tried to hide, the isolation in his posture, the anger and fear and desperation that reminded her so much of her mother in those dark years. Ruth, seriously, stay away from those guys. I know you like to help people, but this is different. These aren't people you can save with a kind word and a smile. Stephanie's expression was genuinely worried. Promise me you'll leave it alone. I promise, Ruth lied and hated herself for it. That night she lay in her tiny studio apartment, Brooklyn, fourth floor walk-up, loud neighbors and thin walls, and stared at the ceiling. Her medical textbook sat on the shelf, collecting dust. 3 years of pre-med at Columbia before money ran out and reality crashed in. She'd been specializing in neurology, fascinated by the brain's complexity, by the possibility of healing what seemed unhealable. She thought about her mother, Patricia Bennett, who'd lost her sight to a traumatic brain injury after a car accident. The doctors had said the same thing they'd apparently told Dongjin: permanent, irreversible, learn to adapt. But Ruth had refused to accept it, had researched obsessively, had found Dr. Elena Volkov, a Russian neurosurgeon doing experimental work in neuroplasticity and optic nerve regeneration. It had taken 2 years, every penny they could scrape together, 2 dangerous surgeries and months of intensive therapy. But her mother could see again. Not perfectly, her peripheral vision was still compromised, but she could see, could read, drive, live independently. It had been a miracle, and Ruth had been there for every step, had learned the techniques, understood the science, knew what was possible when everyone else said impossible. She grabbed her phone, pulled up Dr. Volkov's information. The woman had moved her practice to New York 3 years ago, was still doing cutting-edge work, still performing miracles for the patients everyone else had given up on. Ruth thought about Cho Dongjin, mafia boss, criminal, dangerous, a man who probably hurt people for a living, who operated outside the law, who represented everything she'd been taught to avoid, but also a man trapped in darkness, a man whose hands shook with fear he tried to hide, a man who reminisced her painfully of her mother's desperation. Before she could talk herself out of it, Ruth sent Dr. Volkov an email, brief, professional, asking if she was still taking patients with traumatic optic nerve injuries, mentioning her mother's successful treatment, carefully not mentioning who the potential patient was. The reply came within an hour. Yes, still practicing. Would need to see scans and medical history. Cases like your mother's are rare but treatable with proper intervention. Have the patient contact my office. Ruth stared at the email, heart pounding. She had a possible solution, but approaching a mafia boss to offer medical help? That was insane, potentially suicidal, definitely stupid. She thought about it all night, barely sleeping, weighing options and consequences. By morning, she'd made her decision. Stupid or not, dangerous or not, she had to try. Because 6 months ago, someone had tried to help her mother when all hope seemed lost, and that had made all the difference. Thursday arrived cold and gray, early November, promising winter's approach. Ruth dressed carefully for her shift. Jeans, comfortable shoes, her Sunrise Cafe polo shirt. But in her purse, she carried a folder. Inside, copies of her mother's medical records, Dr. Volkov's contact information, and a letter she'd written and rewritten 20 times explaining what might be possible. The morning shift dragged. Every time the cafe door opened, Ruth's heart jumped. But it wasn't until 2 p.m., the usual time, that the Korean group arrived. 6 men today instead of 5. Ruth recognized most of them. The bodyguard, the logistics guy, the quiet one who never spoke. And Dongjin, moving through the door with careful precision, one hand on the bodyguard's arm, sunglasses hiding his eyes. They settled at their usual table, and Ruth took a breath, steadying herself. This was it. Do it now or lose her nerve entirely. She grabbed the coffee pot, the folder tucked under her arm, and headed over. Her hands were shaking. She forced them still. Good afternoon, gentlemen, she said brightly, starting the rounds with coffee. The usual? Nods and grunts of acknowledgement. She poured, working her way around the table, building up courage with each cup. Finally, she reached Dongjin. Sir? Coffee? Black? No sugar? Yes, thank you. That same controlled voice giving nothing away. Ruth poured, hands surprisingly steady now that the moment had arrived. She set the pot down on the table, and before she could second-guess herself, said the words that would change everything. Mr. Cho, I need to tell you something. I believe I can help you see again. The table went dead silent. Every man froze, turning to look at her with expressions ranging from shock to suspicion to outright hostility. Dongjin's head tilted slightly, like he was trying to place her voice. What did you say? Ruth's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. Your eyes. I know about your injury, and I believe it can be treated, that you could see again. One of the men, the bodyguard, started to rise, voice sharp with warning. Who the hell do you think? Dongjin held up a hand, silencing him. How do you know about my eyes? I've been watching you, not in a creepy way, Ruth added quickly. But you come here every week, and I've noticed things. The way you move, the way your hands shake sometimes, the scar on your temple. I recognize traumatic optic nerve injury because my mother had the same thing. Your mother? Dongjin's tone was carefully neutral, but Ruth could hear the interest underneath. Car accident 3 years ago. Brain trauma, damaged optic nerves. The doctor said she'd never see again. But I found a specialist, and after 2 surgeries and intensive therapy, she recovered. Not completely, but enough. She can see. That's impossible, the logistics man said flatly. Optic nerve damage doesn't heal. It can with the right intervention. Neuroplasticity, nerve regeneration therapy, targeted surgeries. Ruth was talking faster now, slipping into medical terminology before catching herself. Look, I know this sounds crazy. I know you don't know me, and you have no reason to trust me. But I have information about the doctor who treated my mother. She's here in New York now, still doing this work. If you just look at... We're not interested, the bodyguard cut her off. Boss, she's clearly trying to scam you. Probably wants money. Minho, let her finish. Dongjin's voice was sharp. Ruth pulled out the folder with shaking hands. This is my mother's medical history, scans, surgery notes, everything. And this is Dr. Elena Volkov's contact information. She's a neurosurgeon specializing in cases like yours. Cases everyone else has given up on. She set the folder on the table in front of Dongjin, knowing he couldn't see it, feeling stupid and desperate and determined all at once. Why? Dongjin asked quietly. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Because I know what it's like to watch someone you care about trapped in darkness. And I know what it's like when someone offers hope after everyone else has given up. Ruth's voice caught. My mother wanted to die. She was so lost, so angry, so desperate. And then Dr. Volkov gave her a chance. A 1% chance, maybe less. But she took it, and it worked. 1% isn't much, the quiet man muttered. It's more than 0, Ruth shot back. Look, I'm not saying this is guaranteed. I'm not saying it'll be easy. But Mr. Cho, you're young. The injury is only 6 months old. Your brain still has plasticity. If there's any time to try, it's now. Another year, 2 years, and the damage might become truly permanent. Dongjin sat perfectly still, processing. The table remained tense, his men clearly thinking this was a trap or a con or both. Finally, Dongjin spoke. What's your name? Ruth. Ruth Bennett. Ruth Bennett, the waitress who thinks she can cure blindness. His tone was unreadable. This doctor, Elena Volkov, what's her success rate? About 40% for cases like yours. Traumatic injury, relatively recent, patients under 40. The vetting took 3 days. 3 days during which Ruth jumped every time her phone rang, flinched every time the cafe door opened, wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Minho's team was thorough. They verified every detail in Patricia Bennett's medical records, confirmed they were genuine, tracked down Dr. Volkov and verified her credentials, her success rate, her current practice. They even interviewed Ruth's mother, who called Ruth afterward, confused and worried. Baby, why are some very serious Korean men asking me about my surgery? Patricia's voice was concerned. What have you gotten yourself into? I'm trying to help someone, Mama. Someone like you were. Is that okay? That I told them about Dr. Volkov? A pause. If this person is suffering like I was, then yes, God knows Dr. Volkov gave me my life back. But Ruth, be careful. These men, they didn't feel like regular people asking regular questions. I will, Mama, I promise. On the third day, Ruth was restocking the coffee station when the cafe door opened and Minho walked in. Alone this time, still wearing that same watchful expression, he approached the counter directly. Ruth Bennett, we need to talk. Ruth's heart hammered. Okay, let me just... Now. She untied her apron with shaking hands, told Mr. Park she needed a quick break, and followed Minho outside. A black car waited at the curb. Not the Mercedes. Something more modest but still expensive. Get in, Minho said. Every instinct screamed danger. But Ruth had started this, and she'd see it through. She climbed into the back seat. Minho got in front, and the driver pulled smoothly into traffic. Where are we going? Ruth tried to keep her voice steady. To see the boss. Everything you said checked out. The medical records are real. Your mother's case is documented. Dr. Volkov is legitimate. Boss wants to meet with you properly. Discuss options. Relief and terror warred in Ruth's chest. So he's considering it. The treatment? He's considering listening to what you have to say. Whether he actually pursues it? Minho shrugged. That's his decision. They drove to a building in Koreatown, elegant, modern, with discreet security at the entrance. Minho led her through a lobby that screamed money into a private elevator that required a key card up to the 20th floor. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, letting in afternoon light. Expensive furniture, minimalist design, everything sleek and controlled. And there, behind a massive desk, sat Cho Dong-jin. He'd removed the sunglasses, and Ruth got her first clear look at his eyes. They were beautiful, dark brown, almond-shaped, framed by thick lashes, but empty. Not focused on anything, not tracking movement. Just blank. The eyes of someone looking at nothing. It broke her heart a little. Miss Bennett, Dong-jin said, not looking at her but somehow knowing exactly where she stood. Sit, please. Ruth sat in the chair across from his desk, hyper-aware of Minho standing behind her, of the cameras she could see mounted in corners, of how alone and vulnerable she was. Your information checked out, Dong-jin continued. Every detail you provided was accurate. My people even spoke with Dr. Volkov directly. She confirmed she's willing to evaluate my case. That's good, Ruth managed. It raises questions, though. Questions about you. Dong-jin leaned forward, hands folded on the desk. You're 26 years old. You were pre-med at Columbia, neurology focus, until you dropped out 3 years ago. Financial difficulties after spending everything on your mother's treatment. You've been working at that cafe ever since. Living in a studio in Brooklyn, barely making rent. By all accounts, struggling. Ruth's skin crawled with the realization that he'd investigated her as thoroughly as she'd expected. That's all accurate. So why approach me? Why offer this information? If money's so tight, why not ask for compensation? A finder's fee, consultation payment, something? Because I'm not doing this for money. Then why? Ruth met those empty eyes directly. Because 3 years ago, my mother was where you are now. Blind, angry, hopeless. And I was desperate to help her. But I had no money, no connections, no resources. We got lucky. Found Dr. Volkov through a research paper, managed to scrape together enough for a consultation. But it was hard, so hard, and I kept thinking, if someone had just told us earlier, if someone had given us this information sooner, we could have saved so much suffering. She took a breath. You don't have those problems. You have money, resources, connections. The only thing you lack is information. So I gave it to you. Because I've been on the other side, and I know how precious that information is. Dong-jin was quiet for a long moment. You understand who I am, what I do. Yes. And that doesn't bother you? The fact that I run a criminal organization, that I've hurt people, that my money comes from illegal operations? Ruth chose her words carefully. It bothers me. But Mr. Cho, my mother was dying inside that darkness. And when you're watching someone you love suffer like that, you stop caring about a lot of things. You just want to help. So no, I'm not thrilled about who you are or what you do, but I'm also not going to let someone stay blind when I know there's a chance, however small, to fix it. Even if that someone is a criminal. Even then, because blindness isn't punishment. It's not justice. It's just suffering. And I don't think anyone deserves that. Something shifted in Dongjin's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening. You're either very brave or very naive, Miss Bennett. Probably both, Ruth admitted. This time he did smile, just slightly. Dr. Volkov wants to see me tomorrow. Run some tests. Evaluate whether I'm a candidate for her treatment. He paused. I'd like you to come with me. Ruth blinked. What? Why? Because you understand the procedure. You've been through it with your mother. You can explain things in a way I'll actually understand. Not medical jargon designed to obscure. Dongjin's fingers drummed on the desk. And because I don't know you, Miss Bennett, but I know you told me the truth. That's rare in my world. I'd like someone like that present when I'm making decisions about my future. Okay, yes, I can do that. Good. Min-ho will pick you up tomorrow morning. 9 a.m., dressed professionally. Dr. Volkov's office is in Manhattan. Very clinical. Dongjin stood, signaling the meeting was over. And Miss Bennett? Ruth? Yes? Thank you for seeing something worth saving in a criminal. Not many people would. The words hit her harder than expected. Ruth nodded, not trusting her voice, and let Min-ho escort her back out to the car. Dr. Elena Volkov's office was in a medical building on the Upper East Side. All glass and steel and that particular smell of antiseptic and possibility that all hospitals shared. Ruth arrived early, nervous, dressed in the one professional outfit she owned. Black slacks and a white blouse her mother had bought her for interviews years ago. Min-ho arrived with Dongjin at exactly 9 a.m., punctual to the minute. Today, Dongjin wore a navy suit, sunglasses back in place, moving with that same careful precision Ruth had noticed at the cafe. But there was something different in his posture. Tension, yes, but also something that might have been hope. Miss Bennett, Min-ho greeted her with a nod. Boss, Ruth's here. Ruth? Dongjin turned toward her voice. Thank you for coming. Of course, I want to help. They were shown into Dr. Volkov's office, spacious, filled with medical imaging equipment and books, and a wall of degrees and certifications that screamed expertise. The doctor herself was in her 50s, steel gray hair pulled back, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and an accent that placed her firmly in Moscow despite decades in America. Mr. Cho, she said, shaking Dongjin's hand with brisk professionalism. I'm Elena Volkov, and you must be Ruth Bennett, Patricia's daughter. Your mother speaks very highly of you. Thank you for seeing us, Dr. Volkov, Ruth said. Of course. Now, Mr. Cho, I've reviewed the medical records your people sent over. Traumatic brain injury resulting in bilateral optic nerve damage and cortical visual impairment. Injury occurred 6 months ago, correct? Yes. Assassination attempt. Bullet grazed my skull. Caused swelling and bleeding. Dongjin's voice was clinical, detached. I survived but lost my vision. And you've consulted with other specialists? 17. All said the same thing. Permanent damage, no hope of recovery. Dr. Volkov made a dismissive sound. Conventional doctors often lack imagination. They see damaged nerves and assume death sentence. But the brain is remarkable, Mr. Cho. It can rewire, adapt, heal, if given proper stimulus and intervention. She pulled up scans on her computer, detailed images of Dongjin's brain and optic nerves. I need to run my own tests, of course, but from what I see here, you have viable tissue. The damage is significant, yes, but not total. With the right approach, we might be able to stimulate regeneration. Might, Dongjin repeated. What are the actual chances? For someone in your position, age, relatively recent injury, otherwise healthy, I'd say 40 to 50% chance of significant improvement, maybe 30% chance of full or near full recovery. Dongjin's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. And the risks? The surgery itself carries standard risks. Infection, reaction to anesthesia, bleeding. But the specific risk with optic nerve surgery is making things worse. In about 10% of cases, intervention causes additional damage. you could end up with even more impairment than you have now. So there's a chance I could come out of this worse off than I am now. Yes, but Mr. Cho, without intervention, your current state is likely permanent. The brain's plasticity window is time-limited. Wait too long, and even experimental treatments won't help. You have perhaps a year, maybe 18 months before the damage becomes truly irreversible. Ruth watched Dongjin process this, saw the muscle in his jaw working, the way his hands clenched and released. This was his choice. Take a risk for possible improvement or accept permanent blindness. Walk me through the procedure, he said finally. Everything. I want to understand exactly what you'd be doing. For the next 40 minutes, Dr. Volkov explained in detail. The initial surgery to reduce scar tissue and stimulate the optic nerves. The follow-up procedures to implant microelectrodes that would help retrain the visual cortex. The months of therapy afterward, teaching the brain to interpret visual signals again. Ruth found herself translating occasionally. When Dr. Volkov slipped into too much medical jargon, Ruth simplified it, explained it in terms that made sense. And Dongjin listened to everything, asked smart questions, probed for details. And cost, he asked finally. The full treatment, surgeries, therapy, follow-ups, runs about $400,000, not covered by insurance, as it's considered experimental. Money isn't an issue. Then the only question is whether you're willing to take the risk, to hope for something better while accepting you might end up worse. Dongjin was silent for a long time. Ruth could see the war playing out in his expression. Fear versus hope, risk versus reward, the terror of losing even the small adaptation he'd achieved versus the possibility of freedom from darkness. I need to think about it, he said finally. Can I take some time? Of course, but Mr. Cho, don't take too long. Time is not on your side here. Dr. Volkov stood, signaling the consultation was over. Contact me when you've decided. I'll keep my schedule flexible for you. They left the office and the ride back was silent. Ruth sat in the back seat with Dongjin this time, Minho driving, and the tension was thick enough to cut. What would you do? Dongjin asked suddenly. If you were me, Ruth thought carefully, I'd be terrified, but I'd do it anyway. Why? Because my mother told me something after her surgery. She said that being blind wasn't the worst thing that happened to her. Giving up hope was. She said she'd rather risk everything for a chance to see again than spend the rest of her life wondering, what if? Dongjin turned toward her voice. And if it doesn't work? If I go through all of this and end up still blind or worse, then at least you'll know. You'll know you tried, that you fought, that you didn't give up. Ruth's voice softened. Mr. Cho, I watched my mother in that darkness. I saw what it did to her. And the bravest thing I ever saw her do wasn't getting the surgery. It was making the choice to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be better. Hope is dangerous in my world. Then maybe it's time to live in a different world, even just for a little while. Dongjin smiled, small and sad. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. But Mr. Cho, you survived an assassination attempt. You run an entire criminal organization while blind. You're clearly not someone who backs down from challenges. This feels different. This feels like if I try and fail, I'll have lost something I didn't even know I was holding on to. What's that? The possibility, the small, stupid hope that maybe somehow things might change. As long as I don't try, that hope stays alive. But if I try and it doesn't work, he trailed off. Ruth understood completely. I get it, but living in maybe isn't really living. It's just existing in limbo. You're very wise for 26. I'm really not. I'm just someone who's seen both sides of this choice, and I'm telling you, my mother never regretted trying, even when it was hard, even when she was scared, because trying gave her power back, made her active instead of passive. The car pulled up outside Ruth's building. She gathered her purse, preparing to leave, when Dongjin spoke again. If I do this, if I decide to move forward with the treatment, I'd like you to be involved. Help me understand what's happening. Be there for moral support, I suppose. Ruth's heart squeezed. Mr. Cho, I'm just a waitress. I'm not family. I'm not friend. I'm barely an acquaintance. Why would you want me there? Because you see me, Ruth. Not the criminal, not the leader, not the dangerous man everyone else sees. You look at me and see someone suffering who could be helped. That's rare. That's, he paused. That's something I'd like to keep close during this process. Then yes, of course, I'll be there. Whatever you need. Thank you. His smile was genuine this time. I'll call you when I make my decision. Ruth climbed out of the car and watched it drive away, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Fear for what she'd gotten herself into. Hope that this might work. And something else. Something warming and dangerous that she absolutely could not afford to feel for a criminal. But she felt it anyway. Dong-jin didn't call for 3 days. 3 days during which Ruth worked her shifts, fielded concerned questions from Stephanie, and tried not to think about whether she'd pushed too hard, whether he'd decided the risk wasn't worth it. When her phone finally rang, unknown number, but she knew somehow, her hands shook as she answered. Ruth, it's Dong-jin. I've made my decision. Her heart stopped. And? I'm doing it. The surgery, all of it. I scheduled the first procedure for next week. His voice was steady, but Ruth could hear the fear underneath. I need you there. If you're still willing. I'm willing. Absolutely. I'll be there. There's something else. Something I need to tell you before we go further. A pause waited with significance. The people who tried to kill me, the Bratva, they're still out there. They failed once, and they'll try again. If you're seen with me regularly, if you become known as someone I care about, you could become a target. The warning was clear. Get involved and danger follows. I understand, Ruth said quietly. Do you? Ruth, these aren't people who play by rules. They're ruthless, violent, and they will hurt you to get to me. I can provide protection, but there's no guarantee. I understand, Ruth repeated, firmer this time. And I'm still willing. Mr. Cho, Dong-jin, you helped my mother without even knowing it. Your situation led me to Dr. Volkov. That information saved her life. Now I have a chance to return that favor. I'm not walking away. Silence. Then, you're remarkable. You know that? I'm really not. I'm just stubborn. His laugh was warm, genuine. Stubborn works. I'll have Minho pick you up next Monday. The surgery is Tuesday morning. Dr. Volkov wants me there the day before for prep. I'll be ready. Ruth, thank you for everything, for seeing hope when I'd given up on it. You're welcome. And Dong-jin, this is going to work. I know it. I wish I had your confidence. Borrow mine until you find your own. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Ruth requested time off from the cafe, told Mr. Park she had family obligations, which wasn't exactly a lie. She researched everything she could about Dr. Volkov's procedures, refreshed her memory on neuroplasticity and optic nerve regeneration, prepared herself to be actually useful instead of just moral support. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Minho picked her up at 8 a.m., drove her to Dong-jin's penthouse. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist decor, everything expensive and tasteful. But Ruth noticed the careful organization, the way everything had a specific place, the tactile markers that helped a blind person navigate. Dong-jin was in the living room, dressed in comfortable clothes, a packed bag by the door. He looked nervous, something Ruth hadn't seen before. Ruth, he said, turning toward her voice, you came. Of course I came. Are you ready? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He managed to smile. Dr. Volkov's office has a pre-op facility. I'll be staying there overnight, surgery first thing tomorrow morning. You don't have to stay the whole time. I'm staying. Ruth, I'm staying, she repeated firmly. You asked me to be here, and I'm here, all the way through. Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, relief, something that looked almost like affection. Thank you. The drive to Dr. Volkov's facility was tense. Dong-jin was quiet, hands clenched in his lap, and Ruth found herself reaching over to take his hand without thinking. He startled at the contact, then squeezed back, holding on like she was an anchor. At the facility, Dr. Volkov met them personally. Mr. Cho, you're right on time. Let's get you settled. The pre-op process was extensive. Scans, blood work, consultations with the surgical team. Ruth stayed by Dong-jin's side through all of it, explaining procedures, holding his hand during the IV placement, being the steady presence he clearly needed. By evening, he was in a private room, sterile and clinical, but comfortable. Ruth sat in the chair by his bed, both of them exhausted from the day's stress. "I'm terrified," Dongjin admitted into the quiet. "I don't think I've been this scared since I was a kid." "That's normal. You're facing something huge. What if it doesn't work, Ruth? What if I go through all of this and I'm still blind? Then you'll know you tried, and you'll still have me here, helping you figure out the next step." Ruth squeezed his hand. "But Dongjin, I really believe this will work. Dr. Volkov is the best, and you're young, strong, determined. Those things matter." "Or what if I die? It's surgery. There are always risks." "You're not going to die. Dr. Volkov has done this procedure hundreds of times. You're in good hands." Dongjin pulled her hand to his face, pressed it against his cheek like he needed to feel her reality. "Stay with me tonight? I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't want to be alone." Ruth's heart broke and warmed simultaneously. This powerful, dangerous man reduced to simple human need. "Don't let me face this darkness alone. I'll stay as long as you need." They talked through the night. Dongjin told her about his childhood, raised in this life, trained from young age to take over the family business, never given a choice about what he wanted. Ruth shared her own stories, growing up in Georgia, her mother's strength through impossible circumstances, her abandoned dreams of medical school. "You should go back," Dongjin said, "to medical school. When this is over, whatever happens, I'll pay for it, all of it." "Dongjin, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." "Ruth, you gave me hope when I had none. Let me give you back your dreams." She wanted to argue, but something in his voice stopped her. This wasn't charity. This was something else. Something that felt like the beginning of mattering to each other in ways that went beyond patient and advocate. "Okay," she said softly. "If this works, if you can see again, we'll talk about it. It's a deal." He fell asleep near dawn, still holding her hand, and Ruth watched the sun rise through the window, praying to anyone who might listen that this would work, that this man would get to see light again. Surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m. The team came to prep Dongjin at 6, and Ruth stepped out to give them space, pacing the waiting room like a cage animal. Minho was there, along with 3 other men from Dongjin's organization, all looking tense and worried in a way that suggested genuine care for their boss. "He's going to be okay, right?" Minho asked Ruth, voice unusually uncertain. "He's going to be fine. Dr. Volkov is the best, and Dongjin is strong. Boss doesn't show fear often, but last night when I checked on him, he was scared, really scared." Minho's expression was troubled. "Thank you for being here. For him." "Of course." They wheeled Dongjin out at 6:50, already sedated, and Ruth caught a glimpse of his face. Peaceful in unconsciousness, younger somehow, vulnerable. She wanted to run after him, wanted to be there, but Minho held her back gently. "We wait now. That's all we can do." The surgery took 7 hours. 7 hours of pacing, of bad coffee from vending machines, of Minho making quiet phone calls in Korean, of Ruth second-guessing everything. Had she pushed too hard? Was this the right choice? What if something went wrong? Dr. Volkov finally emerged at 2 p.m., still in surgical scrubs, looking exhausted but satisfied. "The surgery went well, better than expected actually. We were able to reduce the scar tissue significantly and stimulate the damaged nerve pathways. He's in recovery now." Relief flooded through Ruth so intensely her knees went weak. "So it worked? He'll see?" "Not immediately. The optic nerves need time to heal and regenerate. He'll likely have minimal vision for the first few days, maybe light perception, vague shapes. But over the next few weeks, as healing progresses, we should see significant improvement." Dr. Volkov's smile was cautiously optimistic. "I'm very encouraged by what I found in there. He's a good candidate. I think this will work." Ruth wanted to cry, wanted to laugh, wanted to do something to release the tension. Instead, she just asked, "When can I see him?" "He'll be groggy for a while, but in an hour or so, you can sit with him." Dongjin looked small in the hospital bed, wrapped in bandages, IV lines running into his arms, monitors beeping steadily. But he was breathing, alive, through the worst of it. Ruth pulled a chair close, took his hand carefully, and waited. Minho had left to update the rest of the organization, promising to return later. For now, it was just Ruth and Dongjin and the quiet beep of medical equipment. He stirred around 5 p.m., a small moan escaping as consciousness returned. Ruth squeezed his hand gently. Dongjin, it's Ruth. You're okay. The surgery's done, and it went well. His hand tightened around hers. Ruth? His voice was hoarse from intubation. You're still here? Of course I'm still here. The first 3 days were hard. Dongjin was in pain despite the medication, frustrated by continued darkness, worried that maybe it hadn't worked, that he'd gambled and lost. But Ruth stayed, slept in the chair by his bed, brought him food he could actually stomach, read to him from books and newspapers, distracted him with stories and conversation. And slowly they built something, a friendship maybe, or the foundation of something deeper. On the 4th day, Dongjin woke up and said quietly, Ruth, I think I see something. Her heart stopped. What do you see? Light, just light and shadow. But it's something. It's more than nothing. Ruth hit the call button for Dr. Volkov, hands shaking with excitement. The doctor arrived within minutes, ran tests, checked his responses. This is excellent, she said, satisfaction clear in her voice. Light perception this early is a very good sign. Mr. Cho, your optic nerves are responding to the treatment. Over the next few weeks, we should see continued improvement. So it's working, Dongjin said, wonder in his voice. It's actually working. It appears so. We'll continue monitoring, of course. But yes, I'm very optimistic about your prognosis. When Dr. Volkov left, Dongjin turned toward where he knew Ruth was sitting. You were right. You said this would work, and you were right. Dr. Volkov was right. I just believed in her. No, you believed in me, in the possibility that I could be more than just trapped in darkness. His hand found hers. Thank you, Ruth, for everything. You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad it's working. I do have to thank you. You gave me something no one else could. Hope. And now maybe a future that's more than just surviving. Over the next 2 weeks, Dongjin's vision improved steadily. Light and shadow became vague shapes. Shapes became blurry images. Blurry images slowly gained definition. Ruth was there for all of it. Watched him see a cup for the first time in 6 months, his expression childlike with wonder. Watched him tear up when he could finally make out the window, could see the city skyline he'd been separated from. And she watched him watch her. It happened on day 16. Ruth was sitting in her usual chair, reading something on her phone, when Dongjin said softly, You're beautiful. She looked up, startled, and found him staring at her. Really staring, focusing, seeing. His vision was still imperfect. Dr. Volkov said, maybe 70% of normal now, but improving daily. What? Ruth's voice came out embarrassingly breathless. You're beautiful. I've been imagining what you looked like, but the reality is so much better. Dongjin's smile was soft, almost shy. Your eyes are incredible. And your smile, I could feel it when you smiled, could hear it in your voice. But seeing it, heat flooded Ruth's cheeks. Dongjin? Sorry, is that inappropriate? I know we're friends or colleagues or whatever this is. But Ruth, I've spent 2 weeks listening to your voice, feeling your presence, depending on you in ways I've never depended on anyone. And now I can finally see you, and you're everything. Ruth's heart hammered. We should focus on your recovery, on getting you back to full vision. I am focused on my recovery, and I'm also focused on the fact that I've fallen for the woman who saved me. Dongjin held her gaze, his improving eyes intense despite remaining slight blur. Ruth, I know the timing is terrible. I know I'm a criminal and you're good, and we make no sense. But I need you to know, you've become the most important person in my world. Dongjin, you're vulnerable right now. Post-surgery, emotional, grateful. This isn't gratitude. I know what gratitude feels like. This is something else, something bigger. He reached for her hand. I'm not asking for anything. I know you probably don't feel the same way. I just needed you to know. Ruth looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd gone from dangerous stranger to someone she thought about constantly, worried about, cared about more than was wise. I do feel the same way, she admitted quietly, and it terrifies me. Dongjin's smile could have lit the entire room. Yeah? Yeah, but Dongjin, this is complicated. You're still recovering. Your life is dangerous. I'm still figuring out what I want. We need to be smart about this. So we'll be smart. We'll take it slow. We'll figure it out together. He squeezed her hand. But Ruth, I've spent 6 months in darkness, and you led me back to light. I'm not letting you go now. You're very stubborn. I learned from the best. They both laughed, and in that moment, Ruth knew whatever happened next, however complicated this got, she was all in. Dong Jin was released from the facility 3 weeks post-surgery with vision at 85% of normal and improving. Dr. Volkov was thrilled, calling him her best success story in years. The plan was continued therapy, regular check-ins, and cautious optimism that he'd reach 95% or better within 6 months. Ruth helped him home, back to the penthouse that felt different now that he could see it. He walked through rooms he'd only navigated by memory, touching things, looking at them with wonder. I forgot how beautiful the city looks from up here, he said, standing by the windows, Manhattan sprawling below. 6 months felt like forever. But you made it through. You're seeing again. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Because of you. Ruth, I meant what I said at the facility, about how I feel. I know, and I meant what I said too. But Dongjin, we need to talk about the realities. Your life, your work. I don't know if I can be part of that world. Then I'll change. I've been thinking about it during recovery, about what I want my life to look like now that I can see it again. He moved closer. I've been running the organization since I was 24, doing what my father expected, living up to his legacy. But Ruth, maybe it's time for something different, something better. You can't just walk away from organized crime. Not easily, no, but I can transition. Move operations toward legitimate business, phase out the illegal aspects, build something I can actually be proud of. His hands framed her face. You made me want to be better. Let me try. Ruth wanted to believe him, wanted to think love could change someone so fundamentally, but she'd also seen enough of the world to know it wasn't that simple. It'll take time, she said carefully, and it won't be easy. I have time, and nothing worth having is easy. He kissed her forehead gently. Just give me a chance. Let me prove I can be the man you deserve. Okay, but Dongjin, if this doesn't work, if your world is too dangerous, or if you can't actually change, I'll walk away. I have to protect myself. I understand, and I won't let it come to that. The next 6 months were transformative. Dongjin's vision continued improving until it was nearly normal. 98%, doctor. Volkov declared with satisfaction. More importantly, he began the slow process of changing his life. He promoted trusted lieutenants to handle day-to-day operations, started transitioning illegal businesses to legitimate fronts, used his resources to invest in community programs, legal ventures, things that actually helped people rather than exploited them. It wasn't smooth. Some of his organization resisted change. Rival gangs saw potential weakness and tested boundaries. There were dangerous moments, close calls, times when Ruth worried he'd get pulled back into violence. But Dongjin held firm, and Ruth was there beside him, helping him navigate, reminding him why he was doing this. They grew closer through the struggle, late nights talking about future dreams, stolen moments of normalcy, building something real in the chaos. Ruth went back to school, Columbia accepting her return with open arms. Dongjin funded it all, refusing to take no for an answer. You gave me sight, he'd said. Let me give you your dreams. And slowly, impossibly, they built a life together. Dongjin's penthouse became Ruth's second home. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's fears and hopes and complicated histories, fell deeper in love while fighting to create a world where that love could survive. 1 year after the surgery, Dongjin took Ruth back to Sunrise Cafe, not for a meeting with his men, but just the two of them, sitting at the same table where she'd first noticed him. Do you remember, he asked, looking around with eyes that could actually see now. You watching me, trying to figure out if you should say something? I was so nervous. You were so intimidating. And you were so brave, walking up to a table full of criminals, telling me you could heal my eyes. He took her hands across the table. Everyone thought you were crazy. Minho wanted to throw you out. But you just stood there, completely certain, offering hope I'd given up on. I had no idea if it would work. I just knew I had to try. It worked. Better than I could have imagined. Not just the vision, but everything else. Ruth, you didn't just heal my eyes. You healed my entire life. Gave me a reason to want to be better, to build something worth seeing. He pulled out a small box, and Ruth's breath caught. I know this is fast. I know we're still figuring things out. But Ruth Bennett, you're the strongest, bravest, most stubborn person I've ever met. You charged into my darkness without hesitation and refused to let me stay there. Dongjin opened the box, revealing a ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. Will you marry me? Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth the risk you took? Tears streamed down Ruth's face. A year ago, she'd been a waitress with abandoned dreams, serving coffee to dangerous men. Now she was here, looking at a man who'd transformed his entire life, offering her a future she'd never imagined. Yes, she said, laughing through tears. Yes, you impossible, wonderful man. I'll marry you. Dongjin's smile was brighter than sunlight. He slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her across the table to kiss her, and the whole cafe burst into applause. Because sometimes miracles came in unexpected forms. Sometimes healing wasn't just about medicine and surgery. It was about belief, about stubborn hope, about refusing to accept darkness as the end of the story. I can see you, Dongjin whispered against her lips. Finally, completely, perfectly. And you're the most beautiful thing in the world. I told you I could heal your eyes. You did so much more than that. You healed everything. They were married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended tradition and impossibility. Ruth's family from Georgia, Dongjin's organization, now almost entirely legitimate, Dr. Volkov as a special guest, even Mr. Park from the cafe. Patricia Bennett cried through the entire ceremony, kept saying, "My baby did it." She became a doctor and saved a life. Because Ruth had just completed her first year back at medical school, specializing in neurology, planning to work with Dr. Volkov after graduation. You know, Dongjin said as they danced at the reception, a year and a half ago, I was blind, running a criminal empire, convinced my life would never be anything but darkness and violence. And now? Now I can see, really see, the woman I love, the life we're building, the future that's actually worth looking at. He kissed her softly. All because a stubborn waitress told me she could heal my eyes. I told you it would work. You did. And you were right about everything else too. About hope, about change, about the possibility of being better. Dongjin pulled her closer. Thank you, Ruth, for not walking past, for taking the risk, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Thank you for letting me help, for trusting me, for becoming the man I always knew you could be. They danced under lights Dongjin could actually see, surrounded by people celebrating the impossible. A mafia boss who'd gone legitimate, a waitress who'd become a doctor, a love story that had started with the simple declaration, I can heal your eyes. And in the end, Ruth had healed so much more than that. She'd healed his hope, his future, his belief that life could be more than just survival. Just as he'd healed her dreams, her ambitions, her faith that taking risks could lead to miracles. I love you, Dongjin whispered, more than I can ever say. I love you too, and I can say it perfectly, in every language, in every way, for the rest of our lives. Because sometimes healing wasn't just a medical miracle. Sometimes it was two broken people finding each other in darkness and choosing to walk toward light together. Sometimes all it took was someone stubborn enough to say, I can heal your eyes, and refuse to accept no for an answer. And sometimes miracles really did happen.